Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, provided by MindArc and Retail Doctor Group. And today we're going to be talking about click and collect, really diving into what does it mean, why do we need it, and how can we actually implement, and really taking you through the details of what you can do as a retailer. I'd like to welcome Brian Walker, CEO of Retail Doctor Group, and Matt Craig, Director of MindArc, who will talk about this in some further detail. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to put them through the Q&A function on Zoom. You can ask questions during the webinar, and we'll also hold a Q&A towards the end. So put your questions in as you go along, or raise your hand and we can ask any questions to our two experts as we go through. So passing over to Brian and Matt.
Thanks very much, Anastasia. Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Matt. Great to have you with us. I'm Brian Walker, CEO of Retail Doctor Group. And today, as Anastasia said, we're going to talk through click and collect, very much in the design and implementation, the how to implement click and collect. And as we move through these times of omni-channel, digital integration, a competent retailer having a very good interface digitally, physical experience, and of course, building this community. We also look at all the ancillary services such as click and collect, the ability to order online and consummate the purchase in the physical environment. And I think it's very important that whilst we give reference to COVID will show you clearly has accelerated the click and collect demand. But of course, it was moving in that direction. And in fact, 2 years ago, in touring retailers in Europe, personally, I saw click and collect set up in every major fashion house within the capital cities of Europe. So well on the way. So today, with Matt's help and myself, we'll talk through click and collect and how to implement. And when we're working with clients, we're very much looking at this whole integration space and business information systems capability through to operational capability. So as we know, Australian online retail spending grew by 95% year on year for April. Now, of course, that is very much COVID inspired. But what is interesting is in a sector that turns over about 350 billion normally, we're seeing an average of 12, and our insights work is showing us up to 15% of overall retail sales at an average level will be done online by 2024 and accelerating currently through COVID. In this high growth, we're seeing that more than 5.2 million households shopped online during the month. And the other effect of COVID, of course, is that it is inadvertently training people to utilize this online physical store, online only type relationship. And the other thing that's kind of very interesting too is that we're seeing our device usage grow exponentially. That is our Androids, iPhones, and so forth. And we're now spending an average of 4 hours a day on those devices. So unique visits and so forth exponentially skyrocketing. And of course, it's a big catalyst and a large driver for click and collect. And what I should say, obviously, and I touched on this, but click and collect is exactly as it implies. It's the use of a digital device to go online to a retailer's website, look at their range, and effectively allocate that product through the store, physical inventory, collect it in store. And we'll talk about how this is done in more detail shortly. And here we have some figures from Australia Post, which are reasonably consistent. We're probably not, depending on the COVID pandemic, we're not quite as bullish as this overall on the average, but we're not a long way away. But the central point is that there's clear growth in online, which is well known. And we turn to our friends in the United States, and we see that Adobe is saying that US click and collect orders surged by 208% between the 1st of April and 20th of April this year. So there's consistent rationale and consistent evidence that retailers in larger items, fashion, and even, in fact, many items, we'll talk about liquor, food, and so forth, all need to be thinking through strategizing and implementing a click and collect offer. This is Dan Murphy's in Manly Vale. And it's just, as an example of a close to home, it's unveiled a new boot drive-through service at its Manly Vale store, where customers who place their orders online can collect their purchases. And this, of course, is click and collect, but it's also giving recognition to contactless click and collect. Retail Doctor Group Insights, led by Anastasia, went out and looked at retailer sentiment. And really looking in this question at the effect of post-COVID retailer sentiment around online growth and, of course, the link to click and collect. And what we saw, of course, was a view from retailers broadly that, in fact, 4 and 5, saying that online sales will increase post-COVID. So a real recognition that the click and collect, the online growth is really systemic in the business and structural to strategy growth. And then we had a look at consumers to see if there was a correlation in perspectives between retailers and consumers. And of course, what we found was high online growth through to COVID-19 once again, but correlated to retailer sentiment. And before we move to a discussion with Matt, we had one look also through our consumer insights at the click and collect usage in the categories. And as you can see, there's an interesting trend here towards groceries, liquor, pantry groceries, takeaway food, Uber Eats of this world. And of course, the other point on that for us to explore at another time is fulfillment and last mile options. But you can see, you know, what was once the domain of click and collect was the bigger, bulkier items, but that's not the case now. It's very much about a high convenience, high service model. And then we went out to consumers nationally and we saw that 1 in 3 consumers have used click and collect in the last 12 months. Now, that's a 33% ratio, which is extraordinary. And that, of course, is everything from click and collect, if you like, a refrigerator to a pizza, but it's very high. And so in the implementation side of it, the question is how to do it. And I'm delighted to have Matt Craig. And Matt and the MindArc team are partners of ours in digital integration work when we're working on these projects with our clients and their clients around how to implement seamless integration. And today we want to talk a little bit more detail about that. So welcome, Matt.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Thanks everyone for joining. Yeah, I think obviously we went through a few stats then, and Brian covered some really good, I guess, concepts around, you know, what does penetration look like from a click and collect perspective, and what are the different markets seeing, you know, Australia Post for Australia, and then the US with Adobe. I think now it's really, we know this is something that's being talked about, and now it's about understanding, okay, how can my business practically approach implementing something like this? And how do I know it's going to be valuable? So I think that's some good questions to start thinking about as you approach, you know, this type of technology. And really, we're going to explore some key areas of that now. So understanding, you know, the click and collect experience and what it means. And then the 3 components underneath that we've broken it into for now are, you know, what are your business information systems and what are their capabilities? How do we enable that e-commerce component or that digital commerce component? So, you know, the device versus desktop versus app kind of shopping experience and what that means. And then what does it mean for your staff, your internal, you know, kind of operations, and also what does it mean for your customers? They may not be used to using these types of systems, and it's about, I personally think it's about creating a comfortable shopping experience for customers, particularly through COVID. Contactless is obviously a big topic, and we'll see a bit of that mentioned in the further slides, but yeah, let's jump into it.
And Matt, as a starting point, is click and collect for everyone?
There's probably, I wouldn't say it could be 100% for every single business. I mean, you definitely have to understand the value to your customer and how you want to offer it. But yeah, it's definitely something, as we can see, that a lot of consumers are considering, you know, 1 in 3, like that's big percentages. So we want to make sure to stay competitive. How do we make sure we're offering the service if it's the type of service our customer is looking for.
And one of the questions, of course, Matt, is that, and it's in this particular market where we've got, a lot of retailers, particularly home-based retailers, recording good numbers. And certainly it's tough in other segments. And of course, this starts off with an investment case, doesn't it? And it starts off, as you're saying, with offering a better experience for customers. But the question in my mind is it fast becoming a non-negotiable for many retailers?
Yeah, for a lot of retailers, I think it's almost becoming something that you have to offer, or else you're just going to be left in the dust. Your competitors will offer it, and your customers will go with them because of that in some cases. Particularly that contactless offering, we can see that the grocery industry is really leading the charge in terms of click and collect. And people just want to feel comfortable about being able to access their groceries. And then with the increase in demand for online ordering, there's obviously going to be pressures on fulfillment systems and the speed of delivery networks to be able to fulfill that demand. So this has, I guess, come up as another offering to say, hey, you can order from us now, and then the click and collect time frame might be shorter, so you don't have to wait for your 1 week for your delivery because of that increased demand and not being able to service all of that as quickly. And then there's some really good points here that we're kind of exploring as well in terms of the why invest question. How do we help customers who have various different challenges? Like the idea of buying something online means you have to potentially be at a location at a certain time, so that could essentially solve that dilemma. Being able to just go to the store when you have the free time available is an opportunity that you can offer your customer. Exploring the idea of how this could help minimize returns and exchanges for certain types of products. The customer orders online, they know that the product's going to be available for them to pick up, and they like that experience, but when they get in store, they can do that final test of, is this the product I expected? Actually, I picked the wrong size. And, that could save the merchant, costs on, reshipping and all that when it comes to exchanges. And so it's potentially a better experience for a customer as well. And the opportunity as well of upselling while in store.
One of the operational pieces as well, Matt, that's interesting is the physical space that's allocated to click and collect, and that real question about, if you've got a store that's turning over $5,000 a square meter and you need to put 5 square meters aside for this, you've got a business case to overtake to make that work. So there's a real communications piece, marketing, in-store training, which we'll touch on. And so you're really rebuilding your offer because you're putting an opportunity cost against it at the store level.
100%. I think you brought up some really good points there. Like really understanding what the opportunity cost is, and actually trying to measure your goals for implementing something like this is very important. You don't want to be a business that jumps into this just because you can see it's a trend. It definitely has to make sense for what you're trying to do and what you have to offer from that operational level too, is space considerations, and all that. So that was really good point.
And to be consistent with your target market, your marketing, exactly who your target market is, how they're going to shop you, and understanding with good consumer insights that consumer's path to purchase as well. We talked earlier about that high visitation online, researching and so forth, search function, understanding that consumer path to purchase, and then you can direct customers into this offer.
Yeah, that's right.
And making their time far more effective.
100%.
It's kind of replaced the old lay-by, hasn't it, in a way?
Yeah, definitely. It's a good way to look at it. I think with the new technologies available in the changing kind of space with online shopping just being more and more prominent, we're just looking at the different available techniques to service the customer. I think this is where it's all coming from.
I think the other thing that's worth commenting on too is that a lot of times, businesses are looking at something like click and collect, and I think they're rightfully thinking about it from the customer point of view. But what's also critical is to understand it from the business information systems and capabilities. And in a time where, we're watching capital's a bit harder to get, and quite a lot of antiquated systems out there, that is business information systems. How do we advise clients better around this space?
Yeah, and I think this is a really important piece, and sometimes at the beginning of the journey, I guess it gets underplayed, or it's not realized yet that this is actually quite important when it comes to what strategy you can offer your customers. Like the idea of your systems being able to talk to each other to make sure that the experience you're creating is actually possible. So when it comes to your ERP systems, your inventory management systems, and how they talk to potentially your point of sale or in-store systems, because this is what we're talking about, really. We're talking about connecting and marrying up all the different digital and physical systems so that they harmoniously work together, and not create issues like overselling or selling a product to a customer when the inventory is actually no longer available for whatever reason. And I think there's some really important questions in this list. Sorry, did you have a comment?
Yeah. So Matt, just to sort of unpack it a bit, it's that relationship between my inventory movement, my stock movement, my sales, and space, effectively, isn't it? Oh, and CRM, where that becomes one of the modules.
That's right. Yeah, no, 100%. And yeah, it's really asking that question at the beginning. Are our systems capable of this? And understanding that and making sure that that does make sense. And if they're not capable, is it an opportunity for you to think, okay, from a long-term perspective, do I believe that this type of capability is a requirement for my business to go into the future? And obviously, if your current systems aren't capable, there's a bigger piece there in terms of preparing to be able to deliver something like click and collect. And I think that's when that opportunity cost is really important. Understanding the next couple of years for your business, where the economy is going, shopping behaviors. That's really important in that decision-making process.
So one aspect of this may well be that systems can't record inventory in real time, if you like, and it's all batch processed, which is going to make it very clunky for a click and collect or even an endless aisle type capability.
Yes, that's right. And that's a really good example. And there's even situations where even if your systems might be capable within a certain limit, you have to also understand potentially the velocity of how much the system will be used as well. If you're a high turnover, like high number of transactions type of operation, some of the risks are actually the speed of this system being able to keep up. So how fast can my inventory changes be registered? And based on the number of locations and distribution centers, warehouses, is this going to keep, like, are my systems going to keep up with this? Like, if I open this channel, am I creating more problems than I realize? And that's where some of the I guess that's more technology focused, and it's really it comes down to knowing, like, or understanding what kind of numbers you think you'll need to push through these systems, and potentially verifying that with your tech partners as to, okay, A, does this system allow me to do this, and is there a limit that I need to be aware of? Even on your website side of things, like really understanding that your e-commerce platform can also facilitate this from a capacity perspective.
Yeah, and I was thinking as you were saying that, Matt, that we talked about those high numbers researching and the whole click, if you like, part of this. 85 to 90% of it is now done on mobiles or handheld devices. Another consideration in this mix?
Definitely, yeah. You want to make sure that, and that's more so with the experience of the consumer doing that process on the device. So how do you effectively show multiple click and collect options? How do you display that on a particular product, or and how do you then summarize that in the cart to checkout journey to make sure that everything is very clear for the consumer? I mean, obviously it can get complicated if the consumer is trying to buy products that are available only in certain locations and not others. How do you handle that? Keeping things in mind like that. Like, do you do internal transfers to facilitate that? And if you are going to do that, do your systems even allow for something like that? So there's definitely intricacies as you dive into the different use cases, I guess. And yeah, there's a lot we can explore there. And I think another thing to keep in mind is if you do have systems that you're currently using, potentially there's modules you need to activate on those systems that you currently don't have active. So it's also keeping that in mind, and that might obviously be something you have to account for when you look at opportunity cost versus, you know, the potential benefit or opportunity there to actually implement something like this for your consumer.
And I would think that a module like CRM and really igniting your CRM platform would come into this as well, because it's such valuable data.
Yeah, it definitely, it's very valuable data. And one of the other things that I always think is interesting is a lot of the time that a lot of in-store staff don't really understand the experience that's being had on the digital side of things in terms of touch points on device or how the checkout process might work for a customer. And this, introducing something like this really means that your team really has to understand that whole experience for the customer to be able to service them the best way possible. And I think, I mean, to one of the points in this list here, you know, the ideas of click and collect and endless aisle, those are two sides of the coin, right? So I know we're not really exploring endless aisle today, but that's definitely something also to keep in mind as you're looking into systems like this.
Absolutely. And I think, so one of the pieces as we start journeys with our client is obviously all the piece around market positioning, customer, external customer, but this is as critical, really, isn't it, in terms of what's my capability around my business information system?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's going to become more and more critical as we see the trends heading in that direction. And this next slide is a good example here of, you know, Target. They're thinking about how we're going to actually display this on our different touch points to make our customer understand what the process actually is. So in terms of the retail world, obviously everyone's probably heard about click and collect. Consumers have probably seen it on various sites. I wouldn't say that every consumer is completely used to buying product through a click and collect experience. And the other thing is that it's not 100% consistent across the different sites or different brands. Like not every brand delivers click and collect the same. And that's where education for your consumer, you know, allowing them to experience it for the first time or encouraging that might mean, you know, better uptake. And it actually also might be a service that they didn't realize they wanted. So that's also something to keep in mind is, you know, how am I going to roll this out so that the consumer understands the value that it can have for them. There's some easy ways at the moment in terms of like really promoting that contactless angle. But you know, into the future, it's definitely something to keep in mind is understand the value for the customer and identify whether or not they actually even realize that they have a potentially valuable option to take when they're shopping on your site.
Yeah, I also think done well, there's valuable add-on sales and merchandising opportunities within the store. I mean, the early days of click and collect was sort of you taking into this dark room in the back of a store, and it was kind of like a little storeroom. But I've seen many examples where click and collect is front and center in stores, packed with other merchandise. And of course, as we move towards AI and that type of predictive technology for many retailers, once we click on something, up comes substitute product if necessary, but certainly add-on opportunities. So do you see click and collect being a sort of a foundation for that opportunity?
Definitely, yeah. You can definitely use AI to make it easier for your in-store staff to know potentially what would be good upsell items. Having your staff prepared for that pickup as well is also important. I think the last experience you want to create is when someone comes in and says, I've got a click and collect order, and they're like, oh, give me a second, I'm going to have to pick and pack it for you now. Yeah. I think that's something you want to avoid. You want it to be that really seamless, this was a great experience, I ordered everything online, I'm here. And then the staff members in stores also trying to provide them value by saying, you know, you brought this product, but here's something that is really complementary to it as well if you want to consider it. And that's obviously easy upsell opportunities. But yeah, so creating that really like premium experience, I think is what customers are going to come back for.
And how does a retailer overcome your point around click and collect order is made, person gets into store, customer goes to store, and then it's not waiting for them?
Yeah, and obviously that's what you want to avoid. And there's different things to consider here is making sure the customer is aware of the time frame. That's a big one. some customers might, go through that whole experience, purchase it, say, yep, I'm going to buy it from that store, and then they just leave their house and go pick it up. And that might be too quick, you know what I mean? Like that might not keep the systems, I'll give the systems enough time to do what it needs to do. So making it very clear as they check out, in every confirmation, like, what's the next step?
Yeah.
Wait for our SMS as an example. Like, we'll SMS you when the order's ready to pick up. And I think I really like the idea of SMS because, someone might be shopping one day and they're like, okay, cool, I'm going to be out tomorrow, so I'll pick it up while I'm there or while I'm out. And it gives them that ability to access that in a very easy way. It's almost a really easy notification process. But so that's one side, making sure the customer is super aware of exactly what the process is so that they don't come into your store and, stress out the in-store staff and come too early. And then on the other side, making sure that your systems are in place to have the right notification process for the staff in store. How often, what's the frequency they need to be checking that system? Is there an alert system that makes it easy for them to know that something's needing to be pick and packed? Just understanding that process, and it could be different for different stores, but yeah, just making sure that works in a flawless way.
Yeah, and that tracking system for customers is interesting as well. And that's yet another capability of your business information system, isn't it? To be able to identify a customer and then keep them in the loop, as it were. That's right.
Yeah, you want to make it easy, and like sometimes over communicating is a good thing, but obviously there's a fine balance between over communicating and just making sure that the customer is aware.
So thinking about points of distribution for your store, thinking about the logistics, the process and flow of information, timing, sequencing, and obviously that view of all inventory at any given point mm-hmm. is just crucial, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crucial, and I think people are demanding it more and more. I mean, we can see even with systems like Domino's. I think a lot of people have used the Domino's ordering system. Now they've got a really clear, transparent page that tells you exactly what step in the journey you're in, and that gives confidence for customers. They're like, okay, that's being made. It's not gonna be forgotten accidentally, and I'll have to call the store and make sure my order is made. I mean, it's about giving the customers confidence that the experience is working.
And I think, Matt, these are really good points. And this training and educating customers, customer feedback around the process. We've touched a little bit this morning on the promotion of click and collect. Mm-hmm. Some really nice pieces online, which we'll see some examples of, and in-store, so there's a relationship between the two. Yeah. And training staff in click and collect is pretty important as well, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. I think we'll dive into that a bit more as well. This example on the screen at the moment, Uniqlo, obviously a brand that a lot of people will know. Just another example of them educating their consumer, having a page on their site dedicated to explaining the click and collect flow. What I really like about this page as well is they're actually comparing the costs between some of the different pickup, collection, fulfillment options down there at the bottom. So they have a rates comparison where they talk about, click and collect being free because obviously you're coming into the store, so they're not going to charge you for that process. And then you might use some of their other locker systems where they, leave the product at a certain location for you and whatnot. But yeah, I find that a very interesting way to contrast click and collect versus other options for your customer. So they can see A, yes, this is the process, and B, this is how it stacks up against my other fulfillment options.
Yeah, I think that's some really good points. And I like your point here around training and educating staff as well. So yes. Both customers and staff, so that there's an incentive for both parties. And really, ultimately, this is a convenience play, isn't it? So
it is, yeah. It's making that in-store experience convenient. That's the goal. And I guess it's not just the in-store experience, it's the consumer experience with your brand, making that convenient. So, if shoppers aren't comfortable having their product delivered to their house, this is another option for them. And I wouldn't say it's for everyone. Not everyone will want to use click and collect, but if a good percentage of your customers are looking for this, you don't want to miss that opportunity for them to go to someone else who does offer it for them.
Absolutely. I also like some of the retail examples I'm seeing where customers are asked after the click and collect experience, just a quick online survey, a quick flick of just a few questions about how was the service, what was the timing. In other words, getting that customer feedback into the loop, which I thought was also a nice way to do it and helping to build brand trust.
Definitely.
And
Yeah, that's a great point. Like getting that feedback loop for your customer is important, and you're also reassuring the business that they're making the right choices. So you can hop to the next slide if you want. I think the next one covers that piece you were talking about before, which is the training and education of your staff and organization, which is also very critical because they're going to play a big part in delivering this experience for your staff. So knowing how they should be delivering it in the store they're in, like making sure that they understand the space and how that's supposed to be used. Even when it comes down to in-store staff KPIs, like you don't want to create a conflict for in-store staff to not be incentivized to provide a good click and collect experience for your customer. So, I've seen cases where the online sale is attributed to the site, so there's no value for that staff member to their store, even to the store manager in some cases, where that doesn't help their targets, but they still have to facilitate and deliver it. So it's almost like a burden on them to do this. And it's really about making sure, okay, how do we change those KPIs and targets so that we do accommodate for some kind of value for them from an incentivized perspective to make sure that they're delivering a good click and collect experience for the customer.
What a really interesting and topical comment, because of course, one of the pieces that people are looking at is this idea of, if I order the product online as a customer, and it's physically picked up at the store, at the point of payment, which is typically online or typically at the store, or it varies, determines whether it's a physical store sale, and as you say, attributing to store sales and therefore occupancy rates and so forth, or is it an online sale? Do you have a view on that one?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's an easy mix to solve. I think attribution is getting harder and harder because there's so many factors. Finding a way to, I think for businesses, maybe it's about having that balance of, if it's a click and collect, how do we create, an attribution that creates benefit for both the store online store's sales channel and the store that helps facilitate that click and collect delivery. I feel like it doesn't make sense for that store to not get any benefit from facilitating that experience. But again, this does complicate things like reporting for a lot of these businesses. So I think there is an opportunity to find a way to make that reporting structure make sense. I think there's an opportunity there for someone to come up with something really good around that attribution model. But yeah, even sticking with something simple, whether it's definitely a KPI that they're measured against to deliver a good service like that. Like, I think it's up to the business to really dictate how they see their teams be successful and what activities that means to them for the team to be successful. And I think it's important to not create conflict between delivering that good service and the KPIs that are set on these individual team members.
And you're right, it does vary. With clients we've worked with over the time, we've certainly looked at, it's an online sale effectively with a shared KPI to staff who facilitate it against some customer KPIs. Was it on time? Was it in stock? Did it do the things it was meant to do?
Exactly. Yeah.
But as you rightfully say, it does vary. And I sort of touched on this. It's a point that landlords are starting to look at fairly closely as well.
Oh, okay.
A bit of space. And I think also what's kind of interesting around this is this idea of entire visibility of stock. The retailer has full command of that. And that's not often the case, is it?
No, definitely not. And I think a lot of systems potentially contribute to that challenge as well. So I think this does come back to the slide we looked at a few slides ago, where, what are the capabilities of my systems, and having that 360 view of inventory across the different inventory locations is very, very critical for something like this to work well. Yeah.
And I will loop back to that because there's one question I didn't discuss with you, and that is this startup phase where you're getting all your inventory recounted, reset into play. That's a typical start of this journey, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. You definitely want to have a clear picture of your inventory. The fact that you're connecting multiple systems to understanding that data, that there has to be a certain level of integrity with your data for this to work well. So yeah, if that's definitely a challenge you want to address first. I mean, that'll help businesses prevent a lot of issues anyway if their data is at the right place. But yes, completely understandable. It can be a challenge after years and years of bad data building up. That is potentially a big undertaking, but I do see a lot of value in that.
And it's not really an undertaking for many retailers, and depending on their size, where we decide on Friday that click and collect will be implemented on Monday, and then the data sort.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a bold move, to say the least. But yeah,
So
I wouldn't say you want to rush into just jumping into a click and collect system and expecting it to be an overnight implementation.
Yeah.
We explored these different pillars over the last few slides, like staff training and education, consumer training, education, and all that. Like that's going to take time for you to prepare, and you want the right message to be sent out in a succinct way. Oh yeah, BARBEQUES GALORE, obviously it's a great example again of the contactless click and collect. This really came about due to a lot of the social restrictions as a result of COVID. I believe that they predominantly focus offering this in the Melbourne area at the moment for obvious reasons. And this is something that just came about due to the situation that we're in. But again, clear steps outlined on their site. They promote this on their homepage. It's just, they know that the customers might be looking for products and they can't access it obviously with those physical restrictions. So they're trying to find different ways to make this easy for the customer to not only feel comfortable to collect the product, but also give them an opportunity to actually still purchase.
We discussed an example like the BARBEQUES GALORE example, which is terrific, one of our recent State of the Nation webinars. And it was interesting to see similar in Europe where even car park accessibility and proximity to the retailer becomes a really valuable part of this experience.
Oh, exactly. And this is where it goes that one step further, right? So we're not just talking about in-store experience now. We're talking about, okay, people who are arriving to the store in a vehicle, like how do I facilitate that experience? And I think you saw the slide you had earlier with Adobe. It had an image of almost signs at a car park saying this is the pickup location. So yeah, being able to designate an area that's convenient for the staff to take product to, and also for the consumer to wait in. How that even works, how does the consumer and your staff interact in those locations? Do they have to wait for 10 minutes for someone to finally check, or do you have a system that alerts them? Is there a full-time dedicated member that's there to facilitate that? Is there even enough volume to justify something like that? And I think there's a lot of questions to ask, and it really will, and it'll evolve. Sometimes you have to look at phase one as well. So let's not jump into ultimate sophisticated click and collect endless aisle setup. Let's think about, okay, what are my practical steps to implement phase one? And then, what are the future phases looking like?
Yeah, I mean, this speaks to me of things like GPS tracking and all this sort of geofencing of customers in certain areas. And
yeah, so you can get really fancy. And I think every little cool tech gadget you add, that's going to mean more training and potentially, more staff getting lost about what to do next. So it's really, it's all possible. And those stores that are really pushing the envelope, I guess, to really offer that next level experience, they're going to know that it's going to mean a lot of changes from an operations perspective.
And without asking them directly, but I'm sure the BARBEQUES GALORE team and the next example we show, the next case study, these are months in the process, the sorting out of stock, systems capability, the aspects we've talked about, staff training. It's a dedicated project for an organization to implement.
Yeah, I completely say that that's definitely the case. And obviously speed to market was so critical for something like this in the COVID lockdowns that Victoria experienced. So they might have had a really short time frame, but I guarantee that as it rolled out, there was continuous evolution of that process to make it better each step of the way. So yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. That was a really unique situation as well. Obviously the restrictions in Victoria, but yeah, you're right. It's not something that'll just happen overnight. I mean, having the plan to roll that out is obviously going to take time.
I think it's interesting when this particular case study, when we worked together on it, we went out to the customer, found that they wanted this form of click and collect, and then it was process engineering through the organization to deliver it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and a significant project because not everyone knew on the customer side, or they learnt, or what was involved in the depth of the data sort and SKU allocation and so forth. But what it drove that was pure customer demand. That if you can't offer this for a mobile, for my lifestyle or my working life, you're uncompetitive, was really what that boiled down to.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. I see Osrio as really kind of trying to lead that that digital transformation space for the industry that they're in. I don't think it's definitely not an industry that is notoriously known for really offering a lot of these new delivery techniques, I guess, and so it was a lot of learnings for them. You know, I guess that's what happens when you're trying to trailblaze a little bit. But I think this is a really good example of them trying to approach a phase one type of step to being able to allow their customers to come in and actually, make an order online, know that the product's going to be ready, come and pick it up. This will facilitate that. They haven't obviously gone to like the full next level sophistication yet, but this phase one step at least allows their customer to be able to access that, and that's a really good step for them. So it'd be interesting to see what the next steps in their journey are that we can help them with.
Yeah, and a really fascinating case study in its own right.
Yes, that's right.
And it does take quite a bit of vision from the board and the executive to change that thinking. Click and Collect's a great vehicle to facilitate that. Matt, as we start to wind up, and if there are any questions after that, but what do you see as the risks? I know you've touched on a couple here.
Yeah. So I think this slide is really useful. It kind of summarized some of the top risks that we might have already touched on. Systems not keeping up with volume. I mentioned that earlier when we're looking at capabilities of business information systems, and that's definitely something to keep in mind. You might not anticipate the volumes initially, but over time, it's definitely something you want to keep on top of. Understand, do you see degradation in the experience because of systems being held back or reaching limits? It's just definitely something to keep mindful of as your company scales in this type of service. The staff not understanding the value of the system can be very detrimental to this being successful. If they're not delivering the click and collect experience from the in-store side of things well enough, or they're forgetting steps, or they're missing orders and anything like that, like that's going to create a bad experience for your customer and something you don't want. Going back to education, this is super important. Even consider how do you incentivize that in-store staff to want to facilitate this effectively?
I think I'd add to that. The other side of this is the understanding the customer path to purchase and facilitating that customer navigation is a really key part to this. Not, because they will find you in different ways and they'll want different paths to get to this point, and they'll take different paths. So using that, and I also think not capitalizing on the data is critical. Not capitalizing on the customer intel that's coming with this is important. And make a comment about, and I read this really as around the business case. It might not have a positive ROI year 1, 2, or 3, but there is the converse, which says, can we really afford not to offer this?
That's right. Yeah. So it may be very much a long-term investment as well. And obviously that's sometimes a tough pill to swallow for, decision makers in a business to say, okay, we're going to lead loss this for the future. But yeah, I completely agree.
I think it sets us up, or sets the business up for endless aisle, other absolute adaptations from the platform as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And this is going to allow a whole different series of opportunities to interact with your customer as well. And as you said earlier, having a really good CRM to capture all this information about the customer and how they interact with you, also another valuable point that shouldn't be forgotten. And yeah, and I think what you're saying, yeah, ties to the last point on that slide, which was, it potentially is expensive, but I mean, sometimes, yeah, the long-term investment is worth it, as you said.
And just as we pass before any questions, there are a couple of myths about click and collect out there, Matt.
Yeah, definitely. And it's definitely stuff we hear sometimes here and there. And I'm sure you've heard these many times as well, is click and collect only for a certain type of product? I think rather than thinking about the product, you got to think about the consumer. If the consumer is asking for it, doesn't matter what the product type is.
Yeah, that's right. And we saw in an earlier slide that wide range of products from groceries all the way through to electronics. So that's an absolute myth. Agree entirely.
100%, yeah. And too complicated to implement. I think there's easy ways to make this complicated. I would definitely say you could approach it and you could get very lost and very scared very quickly. Particularly when it gets down to the system capabilities step, which is obviously what we think is one of the earlier steps in the whole journey. But there's also, if you can take, more practical phased steps to try and implement something, you can remove that complication and look at building it over time. But yeah, I wouldn't say that it's too complicated to implement. I mean, obviously, as it's the bigger organizations will probably have more complication. That's typically what we see. But yeah, depending on the nature of your business and how things work, it could go either way.
They're good comments. I'll just quickly recap the takeouts, and then we'll move to any questions, Anastasia, if there are any. Well, obviously the system needs to be set up, ready and capable, which is, sounds very easy. That's really the start of the journey in terms of the diagnostic work that's typically done to help retailers get up to speed with this. The second piece is that customers obviously need to experience the benefit, and they act as advocates. So that benefit is both system, store, process, people, all orchestrated in alignment. To point three, our internal customer, our staff need to be prepared and willing to facilitate the experience. So it's part of a broad internal communication piece, which, by the way, companies like BARBEQUES, GALORE, IKEA and so forth, all make a real point of, and it's very necessary. And so what we've attempted to do today is, with Matt's help, is really get into the granularity and the implementation and the things to consider in terms of click and collect. And we haven't talked a lot about, the strategy per se. We've talked much more about the how to implement and what to think about. So I hope that that was of some help. And we're certainly very happy to, either in conjunction with MindArc, work through what we call our digital diagnosis, where we do spend time with our customers, really asking, testing out these initial questions and getting capability and preparedness for click and collect. Anastasia, are there any questions, please?
Hi, Brian and Matt. We've got one question coming so far from Brenda, which is, which retailer globally would you highlight as best practice? So, I mean, we've talked through a few, BARBEQUES, GALORE, Rio, Uniqlo. Is there any others that you'd say are really doing well in the click and collect space? And what additional value have they been able to generate due to click and collect?
That's right. Well, I'll be interested in Matt's view on this. My mind goes to IKEA globally. I've seen a lot of really good work they're doing in this space. And what it's allowed them to do is format into smaller segment stores, into category specialization. And there was an interesting article where they're attributing somewhere between 5 to 10% of overall volume increase through click and collect. Now, some of that's COVID in the last 6 months. So IKEA is definitely a case study to look at for click and collect. I think Uniqlo are another great case study at a larger scale. And we're also seeing, I've seen some really nice work with smaller businesses like MJ Bale come to mind. So
I was going to say the same thing, Brian. So yeah, you've pretty much covered the brands I was thinking of. And definitely, yeah, MJ Bale is a really good example for a brand here in Australia that's doing it well. And I agree, definitely on IKEA and the Uniqlo.
Yeah, and so there's 3 examples. There are many others. I actually think BARBEQUES, GALORE do a great job with it as well, as we saw. Because there's a lot of thinking, a lot of strategy behind their offer and getting it right. And also what they're doing in conjunction is really I suppose, innovating their in-store experience. So the click and collect is part of a seamless adaptation and progression of their in-store experience. Because what you are doing, of course, is inviting customers into your physical store experience. And if it's boring and yesterday, you're really missing the opportunity to enhance the experience.
Completely agree.
Well, I'm going to thank you, Matt, very much for this morning. In a few minutes, we will unpack Endless Aisle, as you say, the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
So Anastasia, thank you for your facilitation. Thanks everyone for being with us this morning. And I think there's a couple other questions before I just pass them.
I was just going to say, there's just a couple of questions that have just come in at the very last minute. Firstly, is an example of a collaborative click and collect system within Australia. So major retailers sharing a communal click and collect space, kind of looking at a landlord's perspective. I mean, I suppose I think a lot of the options here would be looking at the Amazon lockers utilising that click and collective collaborative system. But any other examples that you've come across?
I've seen some work in Europe, and I know there's a couple of companies here in Australia looking very much as landlords and looking at click and collect from a service to customers, a collaborative offer, I suppose, to the specialty retailers in their centres. And it makes great sense because they often don't have the floor space and they can pool the resource and so forth. I won't name the companies for their privacy, but they exist and they are certainly looking at this service offer. Yeah, I think it makes great sense for a lot of shopping centre operators to be doing this.
I believe 7-Eleven have an offering called Parcel Mate, which is kind of similar. I think you can just send your parcels, standard or express, through their obviously their network of stores, which is another concept similar to, I guess, Amazon's kind of locker system, but a little bit different. Yeah, so there's definitely opportunities to do this at the moment in Australia. And
you're right, Anastasia, as well. The Amazon locker profile is pretty very common in the US and will grow out here, no doubt. That's interesting. I see that very much as a logistics play, fulfillment logistics play, but obviously has the benefits for click and collect.
And one final question is, any tips on a call and collect model if the lead time doesn't allow for a click and collect? So if we've got any thoughts on the call and collect, I would guess a lot of the things that we've actually talked on are still relevant for the call and collect. Having the systems, having the staff well briefed, having the customers educated.
Yeah, I think call and collect can potentially be like a step in between as well. You won't obviously have to integrate your digital system. Like if you have an online store, you won't have to integrate that with your in-store POS. If the calling is being done through to a specific store, I guess you could register the order in your point of sale in the store. And so, yeah, there's no transferring of data required, really. You're just taking your own inventory. But yeah, everything past that point in terms of the experience when the customer comes to the store, having that order experience ready, is there a space for it? Like all the things we've covered, it would basically apply after that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's right. And that's call and collect has been going on for centuries, probably.
Yeah, probably.
And I think one of the things that we can't forget is the value. We're talking about what is the value to the retailer. And it's a lot along the lines of this, what is the value to the customer? Because if we create this customer loyalty, if we give them these options, it's going to make that customer stickiness and the customer pull, get them coming back. I mean, the research that we did showed 1 in 5 customers have used click and collect in the last month. I mean, so that is a large proportion of customers actively wanting that. So I think that is a large value that retailers need to think about. What's the cost for this additional consumer, or effectively losing consumers because of it?
Yeah, agree. Any other questions, Anastasia, which I should have asked before? All right.
No, that's it. We've got all of our questions. We will be sharing the video, so we'll share the video live afterwards with everybody, and the pack. So we'll send you an email today if you do want to watch or share with other team members or associates. And obviously, feel free to reach out for us if you want some further assistance or want to talk through anything further. My email is on there, but I'm sure Matt and Brian are happy for you to reach out to them, either via me or via their LinkedIn directly.
Yeah, thanks for that, Anastasia. And we will very happily share with you some of the insights in a complimentary 15-minute discovery discussion, highly confidential, and we hope it helps. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Anastasia. Thanks, everyone. And that's a webinar from Retail Doctor Group MindArc on how to set up a click and collect offer. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.